The sun hung merciless in the Montana sky, a blazing copper coin that had forgotten mercy existed. Summer of 1885 had arrived with a vengeance, turning the grasslands into brittle yellow seas that crackled underfoot like old bones. The streams ran low, exposing rocky beds that hadn't seen daylight in years, and even the mighty Missouri seemed to have shrunk into herself, conserving what little water remained for the harder days surely coming. Ethan Cole guided his horse along the riverbank, the leather of his saddle creaking with each step. At 32, he cut a solitary figure against the harsh landscape, broad shoulders bent slightly forward, weathered hands gentle on the reins, eyes the color of winter sky, scanning the horizon with the practiced wariness of a man who'd learned that trouble rarely announced itself. His face bore the map of a life lived outdoors, sun-carved lines around his eyes, a jaw roughened by wind and time, and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile easily since Martha had been laid to rest 3 winters past. The Absaroka Range loomed to his left, purple shadows pooling in the valleys despite the midday heat. His small ranch nestled in their foothills, just a cabin and a barn, and dreams that had gotten smaller with each passing season. He'd been checking the fence line since dawn, finding more breaks than he cared to count. The drought had made the cattle restless, pushing against boundaries in search of water that simply wasn't there. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Buttercup, Martha had named her, said every tough cowboy needed something soft in his life, suddenly pricked her ears forward and nickered low. Ethan straightened in the saddle, hand instinctively moving toward the Winchester in its scabbard. But Buttercup wasn't showing signs of danger, just curiosity. Then he heard a sound that didn't belong to the wild. Crying, human crying, muffled and broken, carrying across the water like a wounded bird's call. He urged Buttercup forward, rounding a bend where cottonwoods clustered thick along the bank, their leaves rattling dry as paper in the faint breeze. And there, on a flat rock that jutted into the shallow current, sat a sight that made him rein up short. A woman, young by the look of her, though her face was hidden in her hands, her dress store-bought, he noted with surprise. Not the homespun most women wore out here was the color of prairie roses, though now it bore the dust and damage of hard travel. The hem was torn, mud-stained, and her hat, one of those fancy Eastern affairs with silk flowers, lay abandoned beside her, its cheerful yellow blooms mocking in their brightness. She held a piece of paper clutched in one fist, the edges crumpled from the force of her grip. Her shoulders shook with the force of her sobs, each one seeming to come from somewhere deep, a well of sorrow that had finally overflowed. Ethan sat his horse for a long moment, uncertain. A crying woman was dangerous territory for a man alone, especially a stranger. But leaving her here, with night coming on and the nearest town a hard day's ride that wasn't something his conscience would allow, Martha would have skinned him alive for even considering it. He dismounted slowly, deliberately making noise so as not to startle her. Buttercup snorted and stamped, announcing their presence proper-like. The woman's head snapped up, and Ethan found himself looking into eyes the color of spring sage, green and gray all mixed together, now red-rimmed and swollen from crying. She was pretty in that delicate way Eastern women often were, with skin that had seen more parlor shade than prairie sun. But there was something else there too, a steel in her spine that kept her sitting straight even in her misery. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You all right?" It was a fool question, and they both knew it. She stared at him for a moment, seeming to weigh whether he was threat or salvation, then let out a laugh that had no humor in it. "Do I look all right to you, sir?" Her voice carried education, refinement, Chicago or maybe St. Louis. Not from around here, that was certain. "No, ma'am, I reckon you don't." Ethan kept his voice gentle, the way he'd talk to a spooked colt. "You hurt in trouble?" She looked down at the paper in her hand, smoothing it against her skirt with movements that spoke of habit, of trying to make something right that couldn't be fixed. "Nothing that hasn't been done before, I suppose. Just another fool woman who believed pretty words and promises. Ethan stayed where he was, keeping distance between them. The paper, he could see now, was a letter. The ink smudged where tears had fallen. "You got people around here, someone expecting you?" That broken laugh again. "Oh, someone was expecting me all right. Mr. Theodore Hartwell of the Double Bar Ranch. We were to be married. I came all the way from Chicago. Left everything behind because he said—" She stopped, pressing her lips together hard. "But when I arrived in Billings yesterday, this was waiting at the hotel. His regrets. But he's found himself a more suitable arrangement. A banker's daughter, apparently, one who brings more than just herself to the marriage." The story was common enough. The West was full of promises broken, dreams that dried up faster than the creek beds. But that didn't make it any easier on those who lived it. "How'd you end up way out here?" Ethan asked. "Billings is 2 days back." I couldn't stay there. Everyone knew why I'd come. The whole town was talking about the jilted bride from back east. I paid a freight driver to take me part way. Thought maybe I could find work in one of the smaller settlements. But he left me at a crossroads this morning. Said it wasn't safe to take a woman alone any further. Gave me directions to walk to the nearest ranch. But I got turned around, and then I found the river, and I thought— She gestured helplessly at the water. "I thought I'd rest a spell, figure out what to do." Ethan calculated quickly. The crossroads she meant was a good 10 miles back, through rough country. Her boots, he noted, were meant for city streets, not hiking Montana territory. One heel was already separating from the sole. "Sun'll be down in 3 hours, he said. "Temperature drops fast out here once it does. You can't stay by this river." "I have nowhere else to go." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "No money for passage back. I spent everything getting here. No family to speak of. I'm quite thoroughly at the end of my road. Mr. Cole. Ethan Cole." He made a decision, one that went against every bit of good sense he had. "I've got a cabin about an hour's ride from here. Nothing fancy, but it's got walls and a roof. You can rest up. Figure your next move when you're not half dead from sun and sorrow." She studied him with those sage gray eyes. He could see her weighing options, pride against practicality. "And what would you want in return for this kindness, Mr. Cole?" "Nothing." The word came out rougher than he intended. "I'm offering Christian charity, nothing more. You can take it or leave it, but I won't have your death on my conscience if you stay out here." A minute passed, then 2. Finally, she stood, wobbling slightly on those ruined boots. "I suppose I have little choice, though I should warn you, Mr. Cole. I have nothing worth stealing and no virtue left worth protecting. Theodore made sure everyone knew I'd been living in his hotel room, waiting for a wedding that was never going to happen." "Ma'am," Ethan said quietly, "I've got no interest in stealing or otherwise. Just don't fancy explaining to the sheriff how I came to leave a woman to die by the river when I could have helped." She bent to retrieve her hat, setting it on her head with movements that spoke of ingrained propriety despite everything. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Cole. And my name is Clara. Clara Whitmore, late of Chicago, and apparently now of nowhere at all." Ethan helped her mount Buttercup, noting how her hands shook as she grasped the saddle horn. He walked alongside, leading the horse, neither of them speaking as they made their way through the grassland toward the distant mountains and his cabin. The sun continued its relentless passage across the sky, and somewhere behind them, the river ran on, carrying away the tears that had been shed beside it. But the letter, that damn letter Clara still held clutched in her hand, a paperweight that seemed heavier than all the rest of her burdens combined. As they walked, Ethan found himself thinking of Martha, of the promises he'd made at her graveside about never letting another woman into his life. But this wasn't that, he told himself. This was just basic human decency, nothing more. Still, As they climbed the first of the foothills and his cabin came into view, small and weathered but solid, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set something in motion that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. The West had a way of doing that, taking your careful plans and scattering them like seed on the wind. You never knew what might grow from such moments, whether it would be wheat or weeds, salvation or sorrow. But that was a worry for tomorrow. Today, there was just a lost woman who needed shelter and a lonely man who still remembered what it meant to be kind. The cabin stood like a stubborn declaration against the wilderness, its logs weathered to silver gray but holding firm against time and weather. Smoke drifted from the stone chimney, a thin line connecting earth to sky. As they approached, a yellow dog emerged from beneath the porch, tail wagging cautiously until it recognized Ethan's scent. "That's Buck," Ethan said, the first words either had spoken in the hour since leaving the river. "He's more bark than bite, though he takes his guarding duties serious-like." Clara managed a small nod, her fingers still white-knuckled on the saddle horn. The ride had clearly taxed what little strength she had left. When Ethan helped her dismount, her legs nearly buckled, and he had to steady her with a hand on her elbow. "Steady there," he murmured, then quickly released her arm once she found her footing. Ground takes some getting used to after riding. The cabin's interior was exactly what one might expect from a man living alone, functional, clean enough, but lacking any feminine touches that might have softened its edges. One main room served as kitchen, dining, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A narrow door led to what must be the bedroom, and a ladder in the corner climbed to a small loft. Clara stood just inside the threshold, seeming uncertain whether to enter fully. Her Eastern manners warred with practicality. A lady didn't enter a bachelor's home unchaperoned. But then again, a lady didn't find herself abandoned and penniless in Montana territory either. "You can have the bedroom," Ethan said, moving to stoke the fire. "I'll take the loft. There's a bolt on the inside of the door if that gives you peace of mind." "I couldn't take your bed, Mr. Cole. The loft would be—" "The bedroom," he said firmly. "The loft gets cold at night, and that dress ain't built for Montana weather. There's some of my late wife's things in the trunk at the foot of the bed. They might not fit perfect, but they'll do better than what you're wearing." Clara's eyes widened slightly at the mention of a wife, her gaze automatically searching for signs of feminine presence. Finding none. Understanding dawned. "I'm sorry for your loss." 3 years come winter. Ethan busied himself with the coffee pot, not wanting to see pity in those sage-colored eyes. "The clothes are just taking up space." Martha was practical. She'd want them used. An awkward silence settled between them, filled only by the pop of burning wood and Buck's settling himself on the porch outside. Finally, Clara moved toward the bedroom door, pausing at the threshold. "Mr. Cole, why did you really help me? Men don't generally go out of their way for nothing." Ethan considered his answer, hands still on the coffee pot. "Maybe because I know what it's like to have your world turned inside out. Maybe because Martha would have haunted me something fierce if I'd left you there. Or maybe—" He turned to face her. "Maybe because out here, we help each other or we don't survive. It's that simple." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded and disappeared into the bedroom, the door closing with a soft click. A moment later, he heard the bolt slide home. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. What had he gotten himself into? Come morning, every neighbor within 20 miles would know he had a woman staying in his cabin. An unmarried woman. The scandal would set tongues wagging from here to Billings. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, he had a guest who needed feeding. He set about making supper beans and salt pork, biscuits if he could manage them. His cooking skills had improved by necessity since Martha's passing, though they still left much to be desired. An hour later, a soft knock came at the bedroom door. "Mr. Cole, might I come out?" "It's your home too, for now," he called back. "No need to ask permission." The door opened, and Ethan nearly dropped the skillet. Clara stood transformed. Martha's blue work dress fit her well enough, though it hung loose at the waist and shoulders. She'd washed her face and repinned her hair, and while exhaustion still shadowed her features, she looked more like a ranch woman now than a lost Eastern lady. "The dress is very kind," she said, smoothing the worn fabric. "Your wife had good taste in practical clothing." Martha knew what worked out here. Ethan turned back to the stove, unsettled by how right she looked in his wife's clothes. "Supper's nearly ready. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill the hollow spaces." They ate in relative silence, both carefully maintaining the polite distance of strangers sharing space. Clara ate like someone who hadn't seen food in too long, though she tried to hide it with delicate manners. When she reached for a third biscuit, then pulled her hand back, Ethan pushed the plate toward her. "Eat," he said simply. No shame in being hungry. After supper, Clara insisted on washing dishes despite his protests. "I need to be useful. Mr. Cole, I can't just take." As she worked, Ethan noticed her hands, soft city hands now reddened from sun and rough treatment. The letter she'd carried from the river sat folded on the table where she'd placed it, a constant reminder of her circumstances. "You planning to keep that?" he asked, nodding toward the letter. Clara's hands stilled in the wash water. "I don't know. Part of me wants to burn it, watch it turn to ash like everything else, but another part—" She resumed washing, her movements sharp. "Another part thinks I should keep it. Remember what happens when you trust too easily. Seems to me holding on to hurt is like carrying hot coals in your pocket. Only one gets burned is you." She turned to look at him, soap suds dripping from her fingers. "Speaking from experience, Mr. Cole." "Maybe." He stood, moving to add wood to the fire. "World's full of hurt. Question is what you do with it." The evening deepened, purple shadows filling the corners of the cabin. They sat by the fire, maintaining careful distance, her in Martha's rocking chair, him on the bench he'd carved their first winter here. Buck had come inside and lay between them, a furry chaperone. "Tell me about this place," Clara said eventually. "How does one come to live so far from everything?" "Came out here in 79 inches, Ethan said, watching the flames. "Martha and I, fresh married and full of dreams, bought the land cheap from a man who'd given up on it, built this cabin with our own hands, every log and stone, planned to raise cattle, maybe horses, build something that was ours." "And did you build what you dreamed?" "For a while." The words came slow, pulled from deep places. "Had a small herd, good start on horses. Martha, she kept chickens, had a garden that was the envy of every woman in 50 miles. Then the winter of '82 came, lost half the herd to cold and wolves. Martha took sick with a lung fever. Doctor was 2 days away. He didn't finish, didn't need to." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "I shouldn't have asked." "It's done." Ethan shifted on the bench. "Kept the place going since. Seems wrong to let their dream die too." They sat in silence again. But it was different now, less wary, more like the comfortable quiet between people who understood something about loss. "What will you do?" Ethan asked eventually. "You got any kin who might help?" "An uncle in Philadelphia who made it clear I was dead to him when I chose to come west. He said only loose women chased after men across the country." She laughed bitterly. "Suppose he was right. You were pursuing marriage, not sin. Nothing loose about that. Tell that to the good people of Billings, or to Theodore, who made sure everyone knew I'd been compromised." She wrapped her arms around herself. "No decent man will have me now. No decent work will take me. I'm ruined. Mr. Cole, as surely as if I'd actually done what they all think I did." Ethan felt anger rise in his chest at this Theodore fellow, at the people who'd judge her, at a world that left women so few choices. "That's their failing, not yours." "Perhaps, but their failing still leaves me with nowhere to go." The fire crackled and settled, sending up showers of sparks. Outside, a coyote howled, distant and mournful. Buck lifted his head, listened, then settled back to sleep. "You can stay here for a spell," Ethan heard himself say. "Until you figure your next step, I've got need of help around the place. If you're willing, can't pay much, but there's food and shelter." Clara turned to stare at him. "Mr. Cole, surely you understand what people will say. A woman living here, even working—" "People will talk regardless. They talked when Martha died. Said I must have done something to cause it. They talk when I go to town alone. Say I'm turning into a hermit. Let them talk." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm offering honest work for honest pay. Nothing improper about it." She was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then, "I accept, Mr. Cole, and I'll work hard. I promise you that. I may not know much about ranching, but I learn quickly." "Fair enough." Ethan stood, suddenly needing distance from the intensity of the moment. "Best get some rest. Ranch work starts early." Clara rose too, smoothing the borrowed dress. "Mr. Cole, thank you, not just for the rescue, but for treating me like a person still worth something. Ma'am, far as I can see, you're worth just as much as you were before that fool in Billings showed his true colors. Maybe more. Now you know you can survive what would break most people." She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face from pretty to something approaching beautiful. "Good night, Mr. Cole." "Good night, Miss Whitmore." She retreated to the bedroom, and again he heard the bolt slide home, not against him specifically, he understood, but against a world that had proven itself untrustworthy. Ethan climbed to the loft, settling onto the narrow cot he'd used during Martha's illness when she'd needed the bed to herself. Through the small window, stars blazed in the clear Montana sky, each one a cold point of light in the darkness. He thought about the woman below, about the courage it took to keep going when everything fell apart. Thought about Martha, and what she'd say about this arrangement. Knowing her, she'd probably approve. Martha had always been one for taking in strays dogs, cats, orphaned calves, and now, it seemed, her widower husband had inherited the habit. Tomorrow would bring challenges. He'd need to go to town soon, face down the gossip, establish that Clara was an employee, nothing more. Would need to teach her ranch work, find ways to make this arrangement appear proper to those inclined to think the worst. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. Even with the bedroom door bolted and careful distance maintained, there was something different about knowing another human soul sheltered under his roof. Dangerous thinking, that he'd offered charity and work, nothing more. Best to remember it, for both their sakes. Still, as sleep finally claimed him, Ethan couldn't quite shake the image of Clara in Martha's blue dress, standing in his kitchen like she belonged there, bringing life back to a place that had felt more tomb than home for far too long. The rooster's crow came too early, as it always did, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a rusty blade. Ethan lay still for a moment, disoriented by the sound of movement below footsteps, the quiet clink of the stove lid being lifted. Then memory returned Clara Whitmore, the woman from the river, wearing Martha's dress and trying to find her place in a world that had cast her aside. He descended the ladder to find her already at work, the coffee pot heating and biscuit dough taking shape under her uncertain hands. She'd pinned her hair back severely, and Martha's apron wrapped around her waist. "You don't need to," he began. "Yes, I do," she interrupted, not looking up from her work. "If I'm to earn my keep, I start now, though I should warn you, my biscuits may be more weapon than food." The cooking classes at Miss Pemberton's academy focused more on supervising servants than actual kitchen work. Despite himself, Ethan felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "Can't be worse than mine. Last batch could have been used to shoe horses. They worked in companionable silence, establishing a careful dance around each other in the small kitchen space. When her first attempt at biscuits emerged from the oven flat as pancakes, she stared at them with such dismay that Ethan actually chuckled. "Altitude," he explained, reaching for one. "Takes some adjusting." Martha threw out her first dozen batches. He bit into the biscuit, chewed thoughtfully. "Least these won't break any teeth." "Faint praise indeed," Clara said, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. After breakfast, Ethan led her outside for her first real look at the ranch in daylight. The sun painted the mountains purple and gold, and the morning air carried the scent of sage and possibility. The property wasn't much the cabin: a sturdy barn, a chicken coop in need of repair, and a corral where 3 horses dozed in the early warmth. "It's beautiful," Clara said softly, surprising him. "It's hearted land," he corrected. "Fights you for every little thing. Most things worth having do." He glanced at her, noting the set of her jaw, the way she surveyed the land like a general planning a campaign. Maybe she'd survive out here after all. The days fell into a rhythm. Morning started before dawn, with coffee strong enough to float horseshoes and whatever breakfast they could manage. Ethan taught her to milk the cow, a patient beast named Josephine, who seemed to understand Clara's inexperience and stood still despite fumbling hands. "Talk to her," Ethan advised, watching Clara's frustrated attempts. "She likes conversation." "What does one discuss with a cow?" "Whatever's on your mind. Joe's a good listener." Clara felt foolish at first, murmuring to the cow about the weather, but soon found herself telling Josephine about Chicago, about the life she'd left behind. The cow's warm flank and steady breathing became a kind of comfort, and the milk began to flow easier. The chickens were another matter entirely. The rooster, a mean-spirited bird Ethan called Napoleon, took an instant dislike to Clara. The third morning, she emerged from the coop with her skirts torn and murder in her eyes. "That demon bird needs to be Sunday dinner," she declared, holding a basket with exactly 2 eggs. "Napoleon's been threatening to be dinner for 3 years," Ethan said. "But he's the best rooster I've had. Protects his hens fierce-like. From me, apparently. Give him time. He don't trust easy." "I'm beginning to sense a theme among the males of this ranch," Clara muttered, but there was humor in it. The garden became her particular project. Martha's plot had gone to seed and ruin, but Clara attacked it with determination that surprised them both. She'd never held a hoe before, never felt soil between her fingers with purpose, but something about bringing order to chaos appealed to her. Ethan found her there one afternoon, kneeling in the dirt, tears streaming down her face as she pulled weeds. "Miss Whitmore." She looked up, embarrassed, swiping at her cheeks with dirty hands that left streaks. "I'm sorry, it's just, I found this." She held up a small wooden marker. The writing faded but still readable. "Martha's roses." She loved roses, Ethan said quietly. Brought cuttings from her mother's garden back east. They never took. Too cold, too dry. But she kept trying. "Theodore promised me roses," Clara said, her voice hollow. "Said his ranch had gardens that would make me forget Chicago. Another lie, I suppose." "Maybe." Ethan knelt beside her, took the marker gently. "Or maybe roses weren't meant for this place. Maybe what grows here is different, but not less beautiful." She looked at him then. Really looked. And something passed between them, understanding. Perhaps, or recognition of shared loss. "Will you show me what does grow here?" she asked. So he taught her about the hardy plants that thrived in Montana, soil wild roses tougher than their cultivated cousins. Herbs that could survive drought and frost. Vegetables that might not win prizes for beauty but would sustain life through hard winters. Evenings became their time for different lessons. Clara insisted on learning to mend harness and rope, to understand the business side of ranching. She had a quick mind for figures, better than his own, and soon took over the ledgers. "You're losing money on the cattle sales," she announced one night, looking up from the books. "The buyer in Billings is cheating you." "Known that for years," Ethan admitted. "But he's the only one who'll deal with small operations like mine. There must be others. What about direct sales to the army posts?" They discussed it late into the night, her Eastern education meeting his practical knowledge to forge new possibilities. It was during one of these sessions that she absently reached for the coffee pot at the same moment he did, their hands brushing. Both jerked back as if burned. "Sorry," they said simultaneously, then shared an awkward laugh. The moment passed. But something had shifted. They became more careful about maintaining distance, more aware of each other's presence in the small cabin. One morning, 3 weeks into their arrangement, Ethan returned from checking the herd to find Clara on the porch, using Martha's sewing basket to mend his shirts. The sight stopped him cold. How many times had he seen Martha in that exact spot, doing that exact task? Clara looked up, saw his expression. "I'm sorry. I should have asked." "No." He forced himself to move, to breathe. "No, it's good. They need mending." But his voice was rough, and she set the sewing aside. "I'm not trying to replace her, Mr. Cole." "I know that." "Do you?" She stood, facing him. "Because sometimes you look at me like you're seeing a ghost, and sometimes—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Never mind. Sometimes what?" "Sometimes you look at me like you're seeing me. Just me. And that's almost worse." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He had been seeing her not as Martha's shadow, but as Clara. The way she hummed while cooking. Different songs than Martha ever knew. The determined set of her shoulders when facing down Napoleon. The ink stains on her fingers from working the ledgers. Small things that were purely, entirely Clara. "I'm sorry," he said, not sure what he was apologizing for. "Don't be. Just decide which it is. Mr. Cole, I can handle being a ghost or being myself, but not both." She went inside, leaving him on the porch with truths he wasn't ready to face. That evening, their neighbor Sam Morrison stopped by, ostensibly to borrow a tool, but really to satisfy his curiosity. Sam's eyes nearly bugged out of his head when Clara answered the door. "Evening." "Sam," Ethan said, stepping around Clara. "You know Miss Whitmore. She's working as my housekeeper and helping with the ranch accounts." "Housekeeper," Sam repeated, his tone making the word sound indecent. "That what they're calling it now?" "That's what I'm calling it," Ethan said quietly, but there was iron in his voice. "You got a problem with that? You can head on home." Sam took the hint, but his parting look promised this news would spread faster than wildfire. After he left, Clara stood rigid by the window. "It's starting, isn't it? The talk?" "Let them talk. Easy for you to say. Your reputation can survive it. Mine is already in tatters." She pressed her forehead against the glass. "I should leave. Find somewhere else."
"Where?"
The word came out harsher than he intended.
"Where would you go, Clara?"
It was the first time he'd used her given name, and they both noticed. She turned from the window, eyes wide. "I don't know," she whispered. I don't want to ruin things for you, too." "Only one ruining things is me, if I let you leave because of wagging tongues." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "This is your home for as long as you need it. That's final." "Home," she repeated, like she was tasting the word. "I had a home once, a real one, with parents who loved me and a future all planned out. Then the fever took them, and the bank took the house, and suddenly home was wherever would have me. Theodore promised me a new home, but that was a lie too. And now I'm learning that maybe home isn't about promises or plans. Maybe it's about finding where you can do useful work and be treated decent." She smiled, small but real. even if it comes with a temperamental rooster and a milk cow who only produces when you tell her your secrets. That night, as had become their custom, they sat by the fire, still in separate chairs, still maintaining careful distance, but the silence between them had evolved from wary to comfortable. Clara worked on mending while Ethan carved a new handle for a broken tool. "Tell me about your family," he said suddenly, "before the fever." She looked surprised but pleased. "Father was a merchant. Dry goods. Mainly nothing grand, but respectable. Mother taught piano. She always smelled of lavender and sheet music." Her hands stilled on the fabric. "I was their only child who lived past infancy. They used to say I was their miracle, their answered prayer. And they raised you to be a lady. They raised me to be accomplished. Languages, music, needlework, household management, everything a prospective wife might need except, apparently, the ability to recognize a scoundrel when I met one. That ain't a skill they teach in finishing school." "No," she agreed. "That one you'll learn the hard way." A log shifted in the fire, sending up sparks. Buck twitched in his sleep, chasing dream rabbits. "What were they like?" Clara asked. "Your parents?" Ethan considered. It had been years since anyone had asked about them. "Pa was a blacksmith, hard man, but fair. Died when I was 15. Ma tried to keep the shop going, but—" He shrugged. "Wasn't considered proper work for a woman. We lost it within a year. She passed not long after broken heart. The doc said, though I think it was more broken dreams." "Is that when you came west?" "Knocked around for a few years first. Worked cattle drives, learned the trade. Met Martha in Kansas. Followed her out here like a lovesick pup." He smiled at the memory. "Her father thought I wasn't good enough, ranch hand with no prospects. But Martha, she saw something in me worth betting on. She was right to." The simple statement caught him off guard. He looked up from his carving to find Clara watching him with those sage-green eyes, seeing him clear and true. "You built something from nothing," she continued. "Kept it going even after loss that would have broken most men. That takes a kind of strength they don't measure in bank accounts or social standing." The air between them grew charged, heavy with words neither dared speak. Clara returned to her mending, Ethan to his carving, but both were achingly aware of the other every breath, every small movement, every careful maintenance of the space between them. Later, lying in the loft, Ethan stared at the ceiling and wondered when exactly Clara Whitmore had stopped being an obligation and started being essential. When her presence in his kitchen had gone from strange to right. When her laughter, rare but growing more frequent, had become something he worked to earn. Below, he heard her moving about in the bedroom, preparing for sleep. The bolt still slid home each night, but he understood now it wasn't about him. It was about a world that had taught her trust was dangerous, promises were lies, and safety was an illusion. But maybe, given time, she could learn different lessons here. Maybe they both could. The thought terrified him more than any storm or stampede ever had, because caring meant risk, and he'd already lost everything once. Could a man survive that twice? Through the window, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human fears and hopes, but the land endured, and perhaps, if they were careful and lucky and brave enough, so could they. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Sam Morrison's visit guaranteed the gossip would spread. There would be consequences, judgment, pressure to conform to propriety or face exile from what little society existed out here. But tonight, with Clara safe below and the ranch settling into sleep around them, Ethan allowed himself to hope, not for romance that was too dangerous, too soon, too complicated, but for partnership, for friendship, for the possibility that two broken people might build something whole. It wasn't much, but it was more than either of them had had by that river. And in the harsh reality of Montana territory, sometimes that was enough to start with. The storm built all day. starting as a heaviness in the air that made the horses restless and sent Buck pacing the porch with worried whines. By late afternoon, black clouds massed over the mountains like an advancing army, and the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows in their frames. "Going to be a bad one," Ethan said, securing the barn doors with extra rope. "These summer storms can be fierce." Clara helped him move the chickens to their safest corner, even managing to herd Napoleon without losing any feathers. They worked in efficient tandem now, 6 weeks of shared labor having taught them each other's rhythms. "Will the roof hold?" she asked, eyeing the cabin with concern. "Has so far, though Martha always said—" He stopped, shook his head. "We'll be fine." By supper time, the first fat raindrops were falling, and distant thunder rolled across the valley like wagon wheels on a wooden bridge. They ate quickly, both sensing the storm's approach like animals sense danger. "I should check the horses once more," Ethan said, reaching for his oilcloth coat. In this, Clara gestured to the window, where lightning had begun to paint the sky in violent white strokes. They spook in storms. Need to make sure. A massive thunderclap shook the cabin, and the rain went from drops to deluge in an instant. Water hammered the roof like 1,000 fists, and the wind howled through every tiny gap in the logs. "You're not going out in that," Clara said firmly. "The horses have weathered storms before." As if in agreement, the storm intensified. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes, and the fire in the hearth flickered wildly as wind found the chimney. They worked together to secure what they could, stuffing rags under the door, checking for leaks. Then the worst began. Hail joined the rain, stones the size of quail eggs pounding the roof with terrible force. One window cracked, then another. Wind screamed through the gaps like a living thing. "Get away from the windows," Ethan ordered, pulling Clara toward the center of the room. A terrible crack sounded overhead. A tree branch, or worse, a beam giving way. Water began dripping, then streaming, from a new gap in the roof. "The bedroom," Clara gasped. "The trunk." Before he could stop her, she darted into the bedroom. Ethan followed, finding her struggling to drag Martha's trunk away from the growing leak. Together they moved it to safety, but not before both were soaked through. Back in the main room, the temperature had plummeted. Their breath came in visible puffs, and Clara's wet dress clung to her, her lips already tinged blue with cold. The fire was their only heat source, and it fought a losing battle against the storm's fury. "You need to get dry," Ethan said, grabbing blankets from the shelf. "You'll catch your death." "So will you," she countered, noting his own soaked clothing. Another window gave way, sending glass and rain into the room. They rushed to block it with a board, working by lightning flashes as the wind tried to tear their makeshift repair away. "This is madness!" Clara shouted over the storm's roar. "We need to—" The front door blew open with explosive force, the bolt tearing free from water-swollen wood. Rain and wind invaded the cabin like a physical presence, dousing half the fire in an instant. Together they fought to close it, throwing their combined weight against the door while the storm tried to claw it from their hands. Finally, Ethan managed to wedge a chair under the handle, but they were both drenched anew, shaking with cold and effort. The cabin's temperature was near freezing now. Their wet clothes were dangerous. Hypothermia a real threat. Ethan's hands shook as he fed the remaining fire with precious dry wood. "We have to get warm," he said through chattering teeth. "Both of us, now." Clara nodded, understanding the necessity. Modesty was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Turn around," she managed through her own shaking. They stood back to back before the struggling fire, peeling off wet layers with numb fingers. Ethan wrapped her in the driest blanket he could find, then grabbed one for himself. When they turned back to face each other, both swathed neck to ankle in wool. The absurdity of the situation might have been funny if they weren't in real danger. "Sit," he ordered, pulling her down before the hearth. close as you can to the fire." They huddled together on the floor, shoulders touching through the blankets, sharing what little warmth they could generate. The storm raged on, testing every board and nail of the cabin's construction. "I'm sorry," Clara stammered. "About the tea trunk. I shouldn't have—" "Hush, you saved Martha's things. She would have done the same." Lightning struck close enough to fill the cabin with blinding white light, the thunder instantaneous and deafening. Clara pressed closer to him, and he found his arm going around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. "It's all right," he murmured into her wet hair. "Storm can't last forever." But it seemed determined to try. Hours passed with no lessening of its fury. They fed the fire with furniture when the wood ran low, a broken chair. Then another, anything to keep the flames alive and the killing cold at bay, somewhere in the darkest part of night. Exhaustion began to win over fear. Clara's head drooped onto Ethan's shoulder, and he felt her body relax against his. The contact sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the fire. "Clara," he said softly, "don't sleep. Too dangerous." She stirred, lifting her head. In the firelight, her eyes were enormous, vulnerable. "Talk to me then. Tell me something. Anything." So he talked, told her about his first winter here, when he and Martha had nearly starved. About the spring when wildflowers carpeted the valley so thick you couldn't see ground. About the time he'd found an orphaned bear cub, and Martha had tried to convince him to raise it like a dog. "What happened to it?" Clara asked, her voice stronger now. "Turned it loose when it got big enough. Saw it sometimes for years after, fishing in the stream. Martha always swore it remembered us, but I think that was wishful thinking. Maybe not. Maybe it remembered kindness, even in a hard world." Their eyes met and held. The storm still raged. But here in their small circle of firelight, something else entirely was building. Ethan became acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the rise and fall of her breathing, of the way her hair was starting to dry into wild curls. "Ethan," she whispered, and it was the first time she'd used his given name. Another thunderclap shook the cabin, but this time neither of them startled. They were caught in something more powerful than the storm, pulled together by forces as natural and inevitable as lightning seeking ground. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Clara, we shouldn't—" "I know," she breathed. "I know all the reasons why not, but I'm so tired of being cold, so tired of being alone." He kissed her then, or perhaps she kissed him later. Neither could remember who moved first. It was desperate and tender all at once, tasting of rain and tears and possibilities they'd been denying for weeks. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the reality of what they'd done crashed over them like the storm itself. "Oh God," Clara pressed her fingers to her lips. "What have we? I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "Don't!" Ethan caught her hand. "Don't apologize. Not for that. But this changes everything. You know what people will say, what they'll think." "Let them think it." The words came out fierce, surprising them both. "Let them say whatever they want. They don't know you, don't know what we've built here." "And what have we built? Ethan?" Her voice broke on his name. "I'm a ruined woman staying in your home. You're a widower still grieving his wife. This can only end in—" He silenced her with another kiss, softer this time, a promise rather than a plea. When he pulled back, he kept her face cradled in his hands. "You're not ruined. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, besides Martha. And yes, I grieved her. Will always carry her in my heart. But she's gone, and I'm alive, and so are you. That has to count for something." Clara was crying now, tears sliding silent down her cheeks. "I came here with nothing. I have nothing to offer you but scandal and trouble." "You brought life back to this place. To me, that's not nothing." They held each other as the storm gradually exhausted itself, the wind dying to a moan, the rain softening to a patter. By dawn, pale light was filtering through the damaged windows, revealing the extent of the destruction but also revealing they had survived. As the sun broke the horizon, they were still before the fire, still wrapped in blankets and each other's arms. The conventions they'd broken lay scattered around them like storm debris, impossible to put back together. "What happens now?" Clara asked against his chest. "Now we fix the roof," Ethan said pragmatically. "Board up the windows. Check on the animals." "That's not what I meant." "I know." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "But Clara, last night doesn't change the facts. You need a safe place, honest work. I need help with the ranch. Everything else." He paused, searching for words. "Everything else we figure out as we go." She pulled back to look at him. "And if what we figure out goes against everything society says is proper, then society can go hang. We're not hurting anyone. What's between us is our business. The world doesn't work that way, and you know it." "My world does. This ranch, this valley, this is my world. Our world, if you'll have it." The morning sun painted her face gold and shadow, beautiful in its honesty. "A forbidden love," she said softly. "That's what they'll call it. The fallen woman and the hermit widower. Let them. Words don't change what's true." "And what's true?" Instead of answering with words, he kissed her again, pouring into it all the loneliness of 3 years, all the unexpected joy of finding her by the river, all the quiet contentment of their shared evenings and common purpose. When they finally rose to face the day and the damage, they moved differently around each other, aware now of what had been acknowledged, what had been awakened. The storm had broken more than windows. It had shattered the careful barriers they'd maintained, leaving them exposed to a different kind of danger altogether. But as they worked side by side in the morning sun, clearing debris and making repairs, there was a rightness to it that transcended social conventions. The cabin still stood, battered but unbroken. Perhaps they could do the same. The die was cast now. There would be no going back to careful distance and proper boundaries. For better or worse, their forbidden love had indeed been ignited in the cabin, born of storm and necessity, and the fundamental human need not to be alone. What would come of it remained to be seen. But for now, in the storm's aftermath, with the sun warming their faces and the mountains standing eternal guard, it was enough just to be alive, together and unafraid. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after the storm. When Sam Morrison returned with 2 other men from town, Ethan spotted them from the barn, their horses picking their way through the storm debris that still littered the valley road.
"Clara,"
he called quietly, stepping into the cabin. "Company coming." She looked up from the ledgers, ink staining her fingers as usual. The easy warmth that had existed between them since the storm flickered with sudden tension. They both knew this visit wouldn't be social. "Should I?" She gestured toward the bedroom. "No." Ethan's jaw set firm. "You live here. You've got nothing to hide from." When the men reached the porch, Ethan was waiting. Beside Sam, there was Walter Hensley, who ran the general store, and Sheriff Dwyer, a hard-faced man in his 50s who'd kept law in the territory for 2 decades.
"Gentlemen."
Ethan nodded. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Dwyer dismounted slowly, his pale eyes taking in the storm damage, the repaired windows, and Clara visible through the doorway. "Heard you had some trouble during the storm. Cole, thought we'd check on you." "Neighborly of you." Ethan's tone was neutral. "As you can see, we managed." "We," the sheriff's emphasis on the word was deliberate. "That's what we've come to discuss. This arrangement of yours." Clara appeared in the doorway, chin high despite the flush creeping up her neck. "If you have concerns about my presence here, Sheriff, perhaps you should address them to me directly." Dwyer touched his hat brim. "Miss Whitmore, heard about your circumstances. Unfortunate business with Theodore Hartwell?" "Yes, quite unfortunate." Clara said coolly. Is there a law against misfortune in Montana Territory? No, ma'am. But there are laws about propriety. Unmarried women living with unmarried men. Well, he spread his hands. Creates a certain impression. Miss Whitmore is my employee, Ethan stated flatly. She keeps house and manages the ranch accounts in exchange for room and board. Nothing improper about honest work. Sam Morrison snorted. That what you're calling it, the whole valley's talking. Ethan, about how she was seen in town before, staying in Hartwell's hotel room. Now she's here, and after that storm... He let the insinuation hang. Careful, Sam, Ethan warned, his hand drifting toward his hip where his gun usually rested. He'd left it inside a mistake. Perhaps. No need for threats. Sheriff Dwyer intervened. We're here peaceful-like. But facts are facts. This situation ain't sustainable. Either she moves on, or you make it legal. Those are the choices that keep everyone respectable. Respectable? Clara laughed, but it was bitter. Like Mr. Hartwell, who promised marriage then cast me aside for a richer prospect. That kind of respectable... That's neither here nor there. Walter Hensley spoke for the first time. Point is, this affects the whole community. I've got wives threatening to stop shopping at my store if I keep selling to houses of ill repute. Watch your tongue, Ethan growled, stepping forward. You're speaking about a lady. Am I? Hensley challenged. Ladies don't live unchaperoned with men they ain't married to. Ladies don't. That's enough. Sheriff Dwyer raised a hand. No call for insults, but the law's the law. And community standards matter. You've got a week to resolve this. Cole, either Miss Whitmore finds other arrangements, or you two stand before a preacher. Otherwise, I'll have to take official action. What kind of action? Clara demanded. Vagrancy charges, for start, possible charges of keeping a disorderly house. The sheriff's face was impassive. Don't want to do it, but I will if pushed. After they left, Clara sank into a chair, face pale. Vagrancy, disorderly house, they mean to paint me as a... She couldn't finish the sentence. They're trying to force our hand, Ethan said, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. Think they can dictate how we live. Can't they? Clara's voice was small. They have the law, the community. What do we have? Each other. The simple statement hung between them. Since the storm, they'd been dancing around what had changed, trying to maintain some semblance of their previous arrangement. But the kiss, the confessions, the night spent in each other's arms, it had altered everything. Is that enough? Clara asked. Is it worth destroying your reputation? Your standing here? Ethan knelt before her chair, taking her hands. My reputation's worth nothing if I let them drive you away. But Clara, this has to be your choice too. I won't have you forced into anything. Forced, she repeated with a hollow laugh. When have I had any choices that weren't forced by circumstance? You have one now. Stay or go, fight or run, whatever you decide, I'll support it. She studied his face, this man who'd pulled her from despair by a river, who'd offered shelter without conditions, who'd kissed her like she was precious instead of ruined. And if I stay, what then? Then we face whatever comes, together. That evening, as if to underscore the sheriff's threat, they had another visitor. Harlan Briggs arrived just after sunset, his expensive clothes and well-fed horse marking him as exactly what he was, the territory's wealthiest rancher. A man who collected land and power like others collected coins. Cole, he greeted, not bothering to dismount. Miss Whitmore. Briggs. Ethan responded curtly. State your business. Direct as always. Briggs smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I've come with a proposition. 2, actually. Not interested. You haven't heard them yet. Briggs adjusted his hat, his gaze sliding to Clara in a way that made Ethan's fists clench. First, I'm prepared to buy your ranch. Fair price. Cash money. You could start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere with fewer complications.
Not for sale.
Everything's for sale, at the right price. But if that doesn't interest you, I have another offer. His attention fixed on Clara. Miss Whitmore, I find myself in need of a housekeeper. My estate is large. The position would be respectable. And the pay generous. You'd have your own quarters. Proper chaperones. Your reputation could be salvaged. How kind, Clara said, ice in every syllable. And what would be expected in return for this generosity? Briggs' smile widened. Why, only what any employer expects. Loyalty, gratitude, understanding of your position. The implication was clear, and Ethan moved before thought. Stepping between Clara and Briggs. Get off my land. Protective, aren't we? Briggs observed. Can't say I blame you. She's a pretty little thing, even if she is used goods. But think about it, Cole, how long before the sheriff makes good on his threats? How long before you're both run out of the valley entirely? My offers stand for now. He wheeled his horse and left, but his presence lingered like smoke from a grass fire, acrid and threatening. He wants the ranch, Clara said quietly. This is just another way to get it. He's wanted it for years. Good water access, borders his northern pasture, but using you to get to me. Ethan's voice was dangerous. That's a new low, even for him. Maybe I should... Don't... He turned to her fiercely. Don't even think about sacrificing yourself to that snake. We'll find another way. But as night fell, the options seemed few and grim. The week the sheriff had given them loomed like a deadline for execution, marriage or separation. Those were the socially acceptable choices. But marriage under duress was its own kind of prison, and separation. Ethan watched Clara move about the cabin, preparing their simple supper with movements grown familiar and dear. The thought of her leaving, of returning to empty evenings and silence, was unbearable. But trapping her in marriage to save her reputation, was that any better than what Briggs offered? You're thinking too loud, Clara said, setting a plate before him. I can practically hear the wheels turning. Trying to find a solution that doesn't... He paused, searching for words. That doesn't force us into something neither of us chose freely. She sat across from him, her face serious. Ethan, what if we took that choice back? What do you mean? The sheriff says we have a week to make this legal, or I have to leave. Society says those are our only options. She leaned forward. But what if we chose differently? What if we decided what happens between us on our own terms, not theirs? Clara? Hear me out. Her eyes blazed with sudden passion. They want to force us into their mold, scarlet woman or respectable wife, nothing in between. But what if we refused? What if we stood together and said this is our life, our choice, our love? The word hung between them, finally spoken aloud. It wouldn't be easy, Ethan said slowly. We'd be outcasts, cut off from town, from supplies maybe. Could get ugly. Uglier than being forced apart, uglier than a marriage neither of us entered freely. She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. I've already lost everything society says matters: reputation, prospects, respectability. But I've found something here I never expected. Purpose, partnership. The chance to build something real with someone who sees me as more than a scandal or a commodity. Is that what we have, partnership? Among other things, she said softly. They sat in silence, hands linked across the rough table, while outside the Montana night pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to each other wild voices that knew nothing of human conventions. There's another option, Ethan said finally. We could leave, pack up, head further west, Oregon, maybe, or California. Start fresh where nobody knows our story. Run, you mean strategic retreat. Clara squeezed his hand. And what about the ranch, Martha's roses that never grew? Your dreams that did? Dreams can be rebuilt somewhere else. Can they? She stood, moved around the table to stand beside him. Ethan Cole, I've run once already, from Chicago to here, chasing promises that turn to smoke. I won't run again. This is my stand, here with you, if you'll have me, on our terms, not theirs. He pulled her down into his lap, buried his face in her hair. You know what you're choosing. Really know? I'm choosing the man who found me by a river and offered shelter without conditions, who taught me to milk a cow and trust again, who kissed me in a storm and made me believe I wasn't ruined after all. She pulled back to look at him. I'm choosing you. Ethan, the question is, what are you choosing? The answer required no words. He kissed her with all the pent-up longing of weeks of careful distance, all the promise of what they could build together, all the defiance against a world that would deny them happiness because it didn't fit the proper mold. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Ethan managed a crooked smile. Seems we're choosing the hard road? When have we chosen anything else? Clara asked, and her answering smile was bright enough to chase away shadows. They had 4 days left of the sheriff's deadline. 4 days to decide whether to bend to society's demands or stand against them. 4 days to prepare for whatever storm would follow. But tonight, with Clara warm in his arms and the fire crackling in the hearth, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death, not just hope, but certainty. Whatever came, they would face it together. And that, perhaps, was the greatest rebellion of all, choosing love in defiance of those who would deny it, choosing partnership over propriety, choosing each other over all the world's expectations. The cabin that had sheltered their forbidden love would now become their fortress against those who would tear them apart. And if that wasn't respectable enough for the good people of the valley, well, as Clara had said, they'd already lost everything society valued anyway. What they'd found instead was worth any price they'd have to pay. The sound of approaching horses came just after midnight, hoofbeats muffled but still audible in the still mountain air. Ethan woke instantly, hand reaching for the Winchester he now kept beside the bed. In the main room, he heard Clara stirring. She'd taken to sleeping on a makeshift bed near the fire, both of them maintaining some pretense of propriety even as they defied the world's expectations. How many? She whispered, already reaching for the shotgun they'd taught her to use. 4, maybe 5. Ethan peered through the window, seeing shapes moving in the moonlight. Stay inside. Like hell. Despite the danger, he almost smiled. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a frightened city woman. Now she stood ready to defend their home with the fierce determination of a frontier wife. The riders stopped just outside the circle of yard light. Cole, Harlan Briggs' voice carried clearly. Come on out. Time we settled this. Nothing to settle. Briggs, it's the middle of the night. State your business or move on. My business is with the woman. She's coming with us. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle ready but not yet aimed. In the moonlight, he could see Briggs and 4 hired men, all armed. Sheriff, know you're here. Sheriff's in my pocket. You know that. But he's also got principles. Told me if I waited till his week was up, he'd have to act official-like. I'm not a patient man, Cole. What do you want? Harlan? Clara appeared in the doorway, wearing one of Martha's robes over her nightgown. But her bearing was pure steel. You, darling, come work for me willing, and your man here keeps his ranch. Otherwise, he gestured to his men. Things get unpleasant. You'd murder for land. Murder, no. But if a man defends a fallen woman against respectable citizens trying to uphold community standards, well, accidents happen. Tragic, but understandable. One of Briggs's men shifted, and Ethan caught the glint of moonlight on metal. Clara, get back inside. No. She stepped beside him, shotgun cradled in her arms. Mr. Briggs, you call me fallen, but what kind of man comes in darkness with hired guns to force a woman from her home? What kind of respectability requires midnight raids? The kind that gets results. Briggs leaned forward in his saddle. Last chance. Both of you. She comes with me, or... The shot came from behind the barn, splintering wood inches from Briggs's head. Everyone froze as Sam Morrison emerged, rifle in hand, followed by 3 other neighbors, Tom Bradley, Joe Perkins, and, surprisingly, Walter Hensley from the general store. Evening, Harlan, Sam said conversationally. Bit late for social calls, ain't it? This isn't your concern, Morrison. See, that's where you're wrong. Sam moved to stand at the foot of the porch. Been thinking about what you said the other day, Sheriff Dwyer, about community standards and all. And I got to wondering what kind of community runs a woman out for the crime of surviving. What kind of standards let rich men take what they want while decent folks suffer? Decent, Briggs laughed harshly. She's a... Careful. Tom Bradley interrupted, his own gun now visible. That's my neighbor you're talking about. Been watching these two for weeks now. Seen her work herself raw helping with the ranch. Seen him treat her with more respect than you've shown your own wife. If that ain't decent, I don't know what is. Walter Hensley cleared his throat. My Emma gave me an earful after we visited. Said any woman who could face down the sheriff with her chin up deserved better than what we offered. Said maybe we should judge folks by their actions, not their circumstances. You're making a mistake, Briggs warned. All of you. I own half this valley. And that's the problem. Joe Perkins spoke up. You own too much, control too much. Maybe it's time that changed. The standoff stretched taut. 5 armed men facing 4, with Ethan and Clara in the middle. Then, from the darkness, came another voice. Nobody's shooting anybody tonight. Sheriff Dwyer rode into view, badge glinting. Briggs, you and your men clear out, now! Sheriff, Now. Dwyer's hand rested on his pistol. Official business happens in daylight. Legal-like. This ain't legal. Briggs' face twisted with rage, but he was outnumbered and exposed. This isn't over, Cole. Not by a long shot. After they rode off, an awkward silence fell. Ethan lowered his rifle, studying the men who'd come to their defense. Why? Sam shuffled his feet. Been thinking about Martha, how she always saw the best in folks. Don't think she'd approve of us running off a woman for being human. And maybe, Tom added quietly, some of us remember what it's like to need a second chance. Sheriff Dwyer dismounted, facing Ethan and Clara. You still got 3 days on my deadline, but after tonight, he sighed. Look, I enforce the law, but I also keep the peace. Briggs just showed he's the bigger threat to that peace. You two want to live quiet like. Work the ranch. Mind your business, I might be convinced to look the other way. And the law? Clara asked. Law says you can't live in sin. Doesn't say nothing about hiring a housekeeper who happens to be devoted to her employer. He held up a hand. Don't tell me different, far as I'm concerned. That's the story. And I'll arrest any man who says otherwise for disturbing the peace. It wasn't perfect. Wasn't the full acceptance they might have hoped for. But it was something. After the others left, with promises to check in regularly, as much for protection as propriety, Ethan and Clara stood alone on the porch. They came, Clara said wonderingly. They actually came to help us. Some did. Briggs will be back, and he'll bring more men next time. Then we'll be ready. She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. But Ethan, don't you see we're not alone? This community you thought would reject us, some of them stood with us. He pulled her close, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. You were magnificent, facing down Briggs like that. I was terrified. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about standing up anyway. They went inside, too wired for sleep. Clara made coffee while Ethan checked and rechecked the windows and doors. The threat had passed for now, but they both knew it would return. He won't give up, Clara said, setting a cup before him. The ranch means too much to his plans. Then we make our own plans. Ethan pulled out a map of the territory. Tom Bradley's got connections with the army posts. You were right about selling direct to them better prices. Steady contract. And Joe Perkins knows every water right law in the territory, if we can secure our claims. They talked until dawn, planning defenses both legal and physical. As the sun rose, painting the mountains gold, Clara leaned against his shoulder. Is this our life now, always watching, always ready for the next attack? Maybe for a while, until Briggs realizes he can't break us. He kissed the top of her head. Having second thoughts? No. She straightened, that familiar determination settling over her features. Let him come. Let them all come. I've found something worth fighting for. That afternoon, the first of many changes began. Tom Bradley arrived with his eldest son, offering to help reinforce the barn. Sam Morrison's wife sent over a basket of preserves with a note, "For our neighbors." Even Walter Hensley stopped by with supplies, gruffly mentioning that credit was available if needed. Not everyone approved. Some families made a point of crossing the street when Clara went to town, and certain doors remained firmly closed, but enough opened that life became possible, even pleasant. The night attack had shifted something fundamental. By standing together against Briggs's thugs, the community had made a choice about what mattered more, rigid propriety or human decency. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara worked on mending while Ethan cleaned his rifle, domestic tranquility shadowed by necessity. "I've been thinking," Clara said suddenly, "about what Sheriff Dwyer said, about the law and appearances." "What about it?" "Maybe we should consider his suggestion. Make it official that I'm your housekeeper. Draw up papers. Make it legal and proper on the surface." Ethan set down the rifle. "Is that what you want to be my employee?" "I want to be safe. I want us both to be safe." She put aside her sewing, meeting his eyes. "What happens behind closed doors? What we are to each other in truth, that's our business. But if legal fiction protects us from legal consequences..." "You're right. Tomorrow we'll go to town. Have papers drawn up. Proper employment contract, wages, everything official." "And unofficially..." He crossed to her chair, knelt before her as he had days ago. "Unofficially, you're everything to me. Clara Whitmore. Employee be damned." She touched his face, tracing the lines that sun and sorrow had carved there. "Then we play their game, but live our truth. Our forbidden love," he said with a slight smile, echoing her words from the storm night. Getting less forbidden by the day, apparently. Did you see how Sam Morrison's boy tipped his hat to me? His mother must have had words with him. The world changes slow, but it changes. A sound outside made them both freeze, but it was only Buck, chasing some night creature. They relaxed, but the moment of tension reminded them that danger still lurked. "Teach me to shoot better," Clara said suddenly. "Not just the shotgun, the rifle, the pistol. If I'm to stand beside you, I need to be able to defend what's ours." "Tomorrow," he promised. "We'll start tomorrow." As they prepared for bed, still maintaining separate rooms, though the fiction fooled no one, Clara paused at her door. "Ethan, whatever comes, I want you to know, I've never been happier than these weeks here with you. Even with everything, especially with everything. It's real in a way my old life never was." "I love you too," he said simply, reading the truth she couldn't quite speak yet. Her smile lit up the darkness. "Good night, my dear employer. Good night, my invaluable housekeeper." The door closed between them, but they both knew it was only wood and convention. What truly connected them was stronger than any barrier society could erect. They'd proven that tonight, and they'd prove it again as many times as necessary. Outside, the Montana night stretched vast and wild, full of dangers but also possibilities. And in the small cabin beneath the mountains, Two people who'd found each other against all odds, prepared to face whatever came next. Together. The aftermath of violence lingered in the valley like smoke from a prairie fire. 3 of Briggs's men lay buried in the town cemetery, their graves a stark reminder of how far some would go for greed. Clara's hands had finally stopped shaking 2 days after she'd fired the shot that saved Ethan's life. But the weight of that moment still haunted her dreams. Sheriff Dwyer stood on their porch, hat in hand, his weathered face showing something that might have been respect. Official inquest ruled it self-defense. No charges will be filed. And Briggs? Ethan asked, his left arm still in a sling from where a bullet had grazed him. Lit out for Denver yesterday? Word is he's selling his holdings here, moving his operations south. The sheriff's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. Seems losing 3 hired guns and having a woman outshoot them damaged his reputation, something fierce. After Dwyer left, Clara stood at the window, watching dust devils dance across the yard. I killed a man, she said quietly. I took a life to save yours, and I'd do it again. What does that make me? Ethan moved behind her, his good arm encircling her waist. It makes you brave. It makes you someone who protects what she loves. The ladies in town cross themselves when they see me now. The fallen woman became the killer woman. Some do. Others see you different. He turned her to face him. Mary Morrison brought soup yesterday. Tom Bradley's wife asked if you'd help with the church bazaar. You're not what you were before. Clara, you're something more now, a woman who stood her ground. She leaned into his strength, careful of his wounded arm. The attack had changed everything. The pretense of employer and housekeeper had shattered when she'd screamed his name, thinking him dying, when she'd cradled his bloodied body and promised vengeance on those who'd hurt him. The contract seems foolish now, she murmured. That piece of paper saying I work for you. It served its purpose, gave us legal standing, kept the worst of the gossip at bay. And now? Now. He tilted her chin up. Now I think we've earned the right to make our own choices. A knock interrupted them. Sam Morrison stood outside, but his usual jovial manner was subdued. Ethan, Clara, mind if I come in? They gathered around the kitchen table, coffee steaming between them. Sam turned his cup in his hands, searching for words. Thing is, he finally said, what happened the other night got folks thinking. About community, about what we stand for. The minister's been getting an earful from both sides, those who think you two are living in sin, and those who think you've proven yourselves 10 times over. And, Clara prompted, and he's come up with what he calls a compromise, a blessing ceremony. Not a wedding, exactly, but a recognition of your partnership before God and community. Sam looked up. It ain't traditional, but then nothing about you two has been... Ethan and Clara exchanged glances. The minister would do this, Ethan asked. Reverend Mills is young, fresh from seminary back east. Got some progressive ideas about love and judgment. Says he'd rather bless an honest partnership than condemn it. And the community? Split down the middle. But those who stood with you that night, we're willing to stand with you in daylight too. After Sam left, they walked to the river, their river, where it all began. The water ran clearer now, summer's drought finally broken by autumn rains. Clara sat on the same rock where Ethan had found her, but now she sat tall, unbroken. A blessing ceremony, she mused. Not quite marriage, not quite scandal. Does it matter what they call it? Ethan skipped a stone across the water. I know what you are to me. What am I, Ethan? He sat beside her, taking her hand. You're the woman who came into my life like a storm and woke me from 3 years of sleepwalking. You're my partner in everything that matters. You're the love I never thought I'd find again. I came here to marry one man and found another entirely. She laughed, but it was warm now, not bitter. Theodore promised me a mansion and society. You gave me a cabin and hard work and purpose. Regrets. Only that it took tragedy to bring us together. She stood, pulling him up with her. Let's do it. The blessing ceremony. Let them call it what they want. We'll know what it really is. The next Sunday dawned clear and cool, autumn painting the aspens gold. They'd chosen to hold the ceremony by the river, where their story began. It wasn't a large gathering, maybe 20 souls, but those who came with full hearts. Clara wore Martha's wedding dress, altered to fit and updated with touches of her own. When she'd first tried it on, she'd worried about overstepping, but Ethan had simply said she would have wanted it used for love. Reverend Mills was indeed young, barely older than Clara herself, with earnest eyes behind wire spectacles. He'd spent an hour with them the day before, understanding their story, crafting words that would honor their truth without scandalizing the more traditional members of his flock. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice carrying over the sound of the river. We gather today not in judgment but in celebration. The path of love rarely runs smooth or conventional. Sometimes it winds like this river, finding its way around obstacles, over rough ground, always seeking its true course. Mary Morrison stood as Clara's witness, tears streaming down her weathered face. Tom Bradley stood with Ethan, solid and dependable as the mountains themselves. Clara and Ethan have asked us to witness their commitment to each other, not to judge its origins or dictate its form, but simply to acknowledge what already exists, a partnership forged in hardship, tested by fire and proven true. The words weren't traditional wedding vows. Instead, Clara and Ethan had written their own promises. Clara, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion, you came to me lost by this river, and in finding you, I found myself again. I promise to stand beside you against whatever comes, to work with you, laugh with you, and build a life with you, to see you always as you are not fallen, not ruined, but risen and renewed. This is my promise, before God and these witnesses. Clara's hands trembled in his, but her voice was strong. Ethan, you offered shelter to a stranger and gave her a home. You showed me that broken doesn't mean worthless, that starting over is not defeat but courage. I promise to face each day with you, sharing the work and the joy, the struggles and the victories, to stand with you against the world if need be, to love you not in spite of our story but because of it. This is my promise, before God and these witnesses. Reverend Mills raised his hands in blessing. What God has brought together through mysterious ways, let no man tear asunder, not by law, not by judgment, not by the narrow boundaries of propriety. Go forth in love, in hope, and in the knowledge that you do not walk alone. It wasn't a legal marriage. The law still didn't recognize what they were to each other. But as the small congregation applauded and surrounded them with congratulations, it felt more real than any courthouse document could have made it. The reception was held at the cabin, tables set up in the yard, everyone contributing food. Even some unexpected guests appeared. Walter Hensley brought his wife, and 3 other families who hadn't been at the ceremony stopped by to wish them well. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Ethan and Clara stood apart for a moment, watching their neighbors and friends talking and laughing in their yard. No longer outcasts, Clara observed. No, something better. Ourselves, accepted as we are. Sheriff Dwyer approached, looking uncomfortable but determined. Cole, Miss Clara, wanted to say, well, I was wrong. About a lot of things. What you've built here, what you've survived, that's what really matters. Not what some law book says. He handed Ethan an envelope. Came across this doing some research on water rights for Joe Perkins. Turns out there's a provision in territorial law, common law marriage recognition after a year of cohabitation with intent. Won't help you now, but come next summer. Clara's eyes widened. You mean? I mean in 10 months. What you have becomes legal as well as blessed, if you want it. After he walked away, they stood in stunned silence. The future, which had seemed to stretch ahead uncertain and shadowed, suddenly held new possibility. A year from when I arrived, Clara calculated. Next July. If you can stand me that long. She laughed, the sound bright as the first stars appearing overhead.
Oh, I think I can manage.
The gathering continued into the evening. Stories shared. Music played on Sam's fiddle. Children chasing fireflies between the tables. It wasn't the wedding Clara had once dreamed of. No cathedral, no society pages, no honeymoon in Europe. But as she danced with Ethan in the glow of lanterns, surrounded by people who'd chosen courage over convention, she knew it was better. This was real, earned through trial and honest work. This was a life built on truth rather than pretense. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For finding me by the river, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for fighting for us." "Thank you," he replied, "for bringing me back to life." They danced on. Two people who'd found each other in the wilderness and chosen to make their stand together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges running the ranch, building their partnership into something that could last a lifetime, continuing to prove that love could transcend society's narrow definitions. But tonight, they were simply Clara and Ethan, blessed if not wed, partnered in all the ways that mattered, and finally, fully home. The river sang its ancient song nearby, witness to their beginning and their commitment, and the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human conventions but somehow blessing them all the same with their eternal light. Spring came early to Montana that year, melting the snow from the mountain passes and carpeting the valley with wildflowers. Clara stood in what had once been Martha's garden, now transformed into something new, not eastern roses trying to survive western soil, but hardy native plants that belonged here, that thrived here. 10 months, she murmured to herself, counting the days since that desperate night by the river. Soon, what they had would be recognized by law as well as by heart. "Talking to the plants again," Ethan called from the porch, humor in his voice. "Josephine's getting jealous." She turned, shading her eyes against the morning sun. He looked younger somehow, the hard lines of grief softened by contentment. The ranch had prospered through the winter, their contracts with the army posts proving lucrative, their neighbors' support translating into shared labor and resources. "Just planning," she said, walking to join him. "Tom Bradley's wife gave me seeds for prairie roses, said they'll grow where cultivated ones won't." "Like us," he said, pulling her close. "Wild things that found a way to bloom." They'd decided to leave Montana, but not from fear or shame. The opportunity had come through an unexpected letter Ethan's cousin in Oregon, writing of land available in the Willamette Valley, of communities being built on principles of mutual aid rather than rigid hierarchy. "It's not running?" Clara had said when they'd first discussed it. "It's choosing to plant ourselves in more fertile soil." Now, with their departure only weeks away, the cabin buzzed with preparation. They'd sold the ranch to Tom Bradley's eldest son, a young man eager to build his own dreams on land that had seen so much struggle and triumph. The contract ensured the cabin would stand, the garden would be tended, and Martha's grave would never be forgotten. Sheriff Dwyer visited one last time, bringing the paperwork that would smooth their way. "Common law marriage certificate," he said, sliding it across the table. "Backdated to when it becomes legal. Judge in Oregon will recognize it, make everything official-like." "Thank you," Clara said, touching the document with wonder. "For everything." "Thank you," he replied gruffly, "for teaching an old lawman that sometimes justice and law ain't the same thing." The morning of their departure dawned clear and bright. Half the valley turned out to see them off. Wagons loaded with gifts preserves for the journey. A quilt pieced by the church ladies. Tools from the men who'd stood with them that dangerous night. Sam Morrison pressed a worn Bible into Clara's hands. "Was my mother's," he said. "She always said love was the greatest commandment. Think she would have liked knowing it went with you two." Mary Morrison hugged Clara tight. "You right. You here let us know how that Oregon soil treats you." Even Walter Hensley came, bringing supplies from his store. "On credit," he said with a rare smile. "Pay me back when you're settled, or don't. Call it interest on the lesson you taught me about judging folks." As their wagon rolled out, Clara looked back one last time at the cabin that had sheltered their forbidden love, at the mountains that had witnessed their struggle, at the river where it all began. Ethan reached over, took her hand. "Regrets?" he asked. "No," she said firmly. "Only gratitude." They stopped at the river crossing, where a new sight greeted them. Someone or many someones had placed a marker there, Clara's Crossing. It read, "Where lost souls find their way." Clara's eyes filled with tears. They remembered. They made our story part of this place. "Some stories are worth remembering," Ethan said. They traveled for weeks, through territories raw and new, past settlements that would become cities, across lands that still held the promise of the frontier. At night, they camped under stars that looked the same whether you were in Montana or Oregon, outcast or accepted, forbidden or free. One evening, as they neared their destination, they encountered another wagon broken down by the trail. A young woman sat beside it, crying, while a man struggled with a damaged wheel. The scene was heartbreakingly familiar. Without hesitation, Clara climbed down. "Can we help?" The woman looked up with tear-stained cheeks. "We're lost. Everything's gone wrong. James tried to fix it, but—" She gestured helplessly at their meager possessions scattered in the dust. "Nothing's unfixable," Clara said gently, remembering another woman who'd thought her world had ended. "My husband's good with wheels, and we have food to spare." As Ethan worked with James on repairs, Clara sat with the young woman Sarah, newly married, heading west with more hope than preparation, over shared coffee. Sarah's story spilled out disapproving families, an elopement, dreams of building something new where the past couldn't follow. "They said we were foolish," Sarah confided. "Said our love wasn't proper, wasn't sanctioned. James is Catholic, I'm Protestant. Our families—" "Love doesn't always follow the rules others set," Clara said. "Sometimes it makes its own way." By firelight, she told their story, the river, the cabin, the storm that changed everything, the community that chose compassion over convention. Sarah listened with wide eyes, James joining them as the tale unfolded. "So it's possible?" Sarah asked when Clara finished. "To build a life even when everyone says you're wrong?" "More than possible," Ethan said. "It's necessary. The only lives worth living are the ones we choose for ourselves." They traveled together the last days to Oregon, the young couple taking heart from Clara and Ethan's example, at the border of the Willamette Valley. As they prepared to part ways, Sarah pressed a small wrapped package into Clara's hands. "For your new garden," she said. "Rose seeds from my grandmother's garden. She eloped too, 60 years ago. Said love always finds a way to bloom." The land Ethan's cousin had written about exceeded their hopes. Fertile soil, abundant water, mountains in the distance but gentler somehow, less forbidding. The community welcomed them without questions about their past, caring only that they were willing to work hard and help their neighbors. They built a new cabin, larger than the old, with windows facing east to catch the sunrise. Clara's garden grew wild and beautiful, mixing Montana wildflowers with Oregon natives and, yes, roses that climbed the porch posts in glorious abundance. On their first anniversary in Oregon, their second anniversary by their own counting, Reverend Mills arrived unexpectedly. He'd traveled west himself, called to minister to a growing congregation that valued inclusion over exclusion. "Thought you might want to make it official," he said, grinning. "In all ways." So they married again, this time with full legal recognition, though both agreed the riverside blessing had been their true wedding. The ceremony was held in their garden. With new friends, and old Sam and Mary Morrison had made the journey, bringing news that more families were following the trail they'd blazed. Years passed, the cabin filled with laughter, then with children who knew only that their parents loved each other and them fiercely. Clara became known throughout the valley as someone who helped other women in difficult circumstances, while Ethan's ranch grew into one of the most successful in the region. One day, a letter arrived from Montana. The writer was a young woman who'd heard the story of Clara's crossing, who'd been inspired to leave her own situation of forced propriety to seek authentic life. "They still tell your story," she wrote, "about the cowboy and the lost bride, about love that wouldn't follow rules, about a community that chose kindness over judgment. Some say it's just a legend now, but I know it's true. It gave me courage to seek my own truth." Clara read the letter aloud on the porch, where Ethan was teaching their daughter to whittle. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded them both of Montana storms and new beginnings.
We did it,
Clara said softly.
We changed things, just a little.
"Just enough," Ethan agreed, pulling her close.
Just enough to matter?
Their daughter looked up from her carving. "Tell me again about the river. Mama, about how Papa found you." So Clara told the story again, as she had many times before and would many times hence. About despair transformed to hope, about strangers who became family, about love that society called forbidden, but heaven blessed anyway. And somewhere in Montana, by a river that still ran clear and true, a marker stood testament to the power of choosing love over law, courage over convention, and the revolutionary act of two people deciding that their happiness mattered more than society's approval. The West had always been about new beginnings, about people who didn't fit the molds seeking space to breathe free. Clara and Ethan had simply claimed that promise for themselves, and in doing so, had made the trail a little wider for others to follow. As stars emerged in the Oregon sky, Clara smiled, thinking of that desperate girl by the river who thought her life was over. If she could tell her one thing, it would be this: sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of the story you were meant to live. And sometimes the most forbidden love becomes the most sacred truth, not because rules change, but because love itself changes everything it touches, transforming the wasteland into a garden where all things become possible. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and redemption in the Wild West. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this journey with Clara and Ethan, please subscribe to Wild West Night, hit that like button, and don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these heartfelt stories of the American frontier. Until next time, keep riding toward your own horizons.